Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm going to open with the prayer, and then Craig will entertain us with song and dance. So, good morning, dear Heavenly Father. We thank you for this beautiful spring day. Grant us wisdom to hear the speaker, Craig, and the joy that he gets out of sports and probably some of the frustrations. Thank you for his doing this presentation to us today. We also ask, Father, that you would be with all those in the Ukraine that are fleeing from the ravages of the invasion by the Russians. Guide them, come into the hearts of the people, come into the hearts of all the leaders of the world to know how to deal with this. Be with all those in our congregation that are dealing with different health issues. Bless them, help them to be on the good healing path. Bless this day. Amen. Craig, it's all yours.
Well, Jim Salisbury is going to join us around 10:25, 10:30. He's in Florida with the Phillies covering spring training. And so he said he would sign on about that time. Many of us love sports. They've been a vital part of our lives. And on occasions, we lament what has happened to sports as they've changed and tested our patience over the years. Jim and I are going to give our perspectives. I'm going to start by giving you my average fan's viewpoint. Nothing special, just a typical Philadelphia sports fanatic who savored the few and far between thrills of victory and the all too often agonies of defeat. There are milestones along the way that made me love sports more than school, more than work, and sometimes, and I'll whisper this, even more than my family. And then Jim will give you the professional observer's viewpoint, someone who's been covering sports for a living for more than 30 years. He had to love sports to write and comment on them every day. But there's also got to be aspects that frost him or make him a little jaded, such as the most recent baseball lockout. He can tell you why he got into the business and what it's done for and to him. I'm going to discuss my love affair with sports through a series of pictures that mirror my personal milestones and furnish indelible memories that still resonate as much as a half century or decades and years later. My first memory was one of the 2 or 3 greatest Eagles football players ever, back when I was no more than 7 years old. I remember listening on radio when Steve Van Buren ran over and through the Los Angeles Rams in the 1949 NFL championship game. It was raining and the LA Coliseum was a quagmire. Van Buren ran for 196 yards on 31 carries. The Eagles won 14-0. The year before, Van Buren scored the only touchdown in a Philadelphia blizzard to bring the Eagles their first championship. He had to take a trolley, a subway, a second trolley, and walk blocks in snowdrifts up to his knees to reach Shive Park, where the players then helped the grounds crew remove the tarp from the field. So when I was a kid, I was Steve Van Buren in our backyard. I ran power sweeps around flower beds and hickory trees and announced every move in my small boy voice. It was even better when it snowed. I could be Steve Van Buren hurtling through white powder in my bulky snowsuit and boots. My mother had to look out the window at her kid talking to himself, being driven into a snowdrift by imaginary tacklers and thinking, boy, does he need some friends. But I had friends. They were my sports heroes. I knew all the teams and player rosters. I'd come to bat and imitate the stances of Major League Baseball players. Richie Ashburn choking up and ripping line drives to all fields. Jackie Robinson cocking his bat behind his ear, Stan Musial in his famed peekaboo stance, lashing a triple into the right field corner. My father took me to Shive Park, 21st and Lehigh in North Philly. We watched the great Phillies right-hander, Robin Roberts, duel Cincinnati's Ewell the Whip Blackwell, a great name. Remember what Robbie did before every pitch? He reached down and touched the tops of his socks. It was part of a timing ritual to focus his concentration. My dad took me to Franklin Field in the early 50s to watch Penn State, his alma mater, play Penn when they were still a national power. Once we saw the great Lenny Moore score 5 touchdowns. Penn State was among the first college teams with outstanding black players. Jesse Arnell, Rosie Greer, Charles Blockson, and more. Sports are largely a meritocracy. Sure, there's prejudice, but if you can play, that's really what counts. Lenny Moore was a smooth, stylish runner who went on to fame with the Baltimore Colts. The color of his skin never registered with me. Hank Aaron, Frank Robinson, Willie Mays, to my young mind, were the best. Better than any of my Phillies, who were mostly white, well, until Dick Allen came along in 1964. Another thing about sports, there's a winner and a loser. No ambivalence, no maybes and might be's. If it took extra innings or overtime, some team eventually won. Yeah, there might be a few ties in college football, but in the greatest game ever played, the Baltimore Colts defeat the New York Giants in the sudden death overtime in the NFL Championship in 1958. I saw Alan Amici cross the goal line, and it emblazoned pro football in my brain and in the brain of nearly every true sports fan from then on. As in the movie Field of Dreams, I would have catches with my father. In Little League, he helped me to learn to be a pitcher. Problem was, I loved playing every other position but pitcher. If I was scheduled to pitch, I was so nervous I'd feed most of my dinner to the dog under the table. But I faced up to it, even though I was only successful about half the time. Another important lesson sports taught me. When we were kids, we'd ride our bikes to play pickup games, tackle football in Robin Ingalls' big side yard. Tackle, no helmets, no shoulder pads, no protection of any sort. Sure, we got kneed in the head and knocked a little woozy, but our parents never tried to stop us or warn us that we'd become basket cases. And Robin Ingle grew up to be Dr. Robert Ingle and won a Nobel Prize in economics. Tackle football and pick up baseball without adult supervision planted a love of sports, humility, and tolerance for pain in me that was all enduring. In 1960, I listened with my father on our old Admiral radio to the Eagles defeat the Green Bay Packers for the NFL championship. The game was blacked out on TV in the Philadelphia region. But to get to the big game, Chuck Bednarik had to knock out the Giants' Frank Gifford and cause a crucial fumble. Bednarik was the ultimate gladiator to a Philly sports fan. That same decade, I went to the Palestra, the cathedral of college basketball on the University of Pennsylvania campus, and became inaugurated as a true sports fan. On Wednesday and Saturday nights, doubleheaders were played featuring the Big Five Philadelphia schools, Penn, Temple, St. Joe's, LaSalle, and Villanova. It was war, a tidal wave of sound. Most of the players out of the Philly public and Catholic leagues. Not a bad seat in the house, the air vibrating with electricity. I didn't go to any of those schools, and I barely cared who won, but I sat on the uncomfortable backless benches and watch college basketball at its best. The students rolled out banners from the top of the stands down to the floor, most of them tasteless insults to the schools they were playing. Here's a sample. What are 150 Villanova boosters? Gross ignorance. St. Joe's had a hawk mascot that was required to flap its wings throughout the game. Some beloved ball guy, nicknamed Yo-Yo, strutted behind the benches smoking a cigar. Ranked teams from around the country would come play one of the Philly teams and leaving, vowing to never come back. They almost invariably lost on a questionable call by a notorious ref named Steve Hanzo. If you love sports, the Palestra was the place to be in the 60s and 70s. Being part of the sports scene in Philly, you got to watch some of the best coaches and managers in America. Harry Litwack with Temple back in the 50s, Dr. Jack Ramsey with St. Joe's, Jack Kraft, Fred Shiro with the Flyers, Chuck Daly, Fran Dunphy, Dick Vermeil, Jay Wright, Andy Reid, Phil Martelli, Charlie Manuel. You had to love it when Temple's great basketball coach John Chaney tried to strangle John Calipari at an after-game news conference when Calipari was coaching UMass. That kind of passion is hard to find. And what whetted my appetite for sports was listening to the great announcers or reading the Phillies writers who could bring games and personalities to life. Richie Ashburn traded his bat for a mic and teamed up with Harry Kalas for 30 years in the Phillies broadcast booth, critiquing blind umpires by saying, "There's the pitch right down the middle for a ball." Harry Kalas had the classic Rich Stentorian voice. "Swing and a long drive. There it is, number 500. The career 500th home run for Michael Jack Schmidt," calling Chase Utley the man, or describing Brad Lidge's final strike in the 2008 World Series, or singing high hopes after the games. That was the hallmark of the Harry Kalas's. He had a great voice, and that was his favorite after game. What he did after the games. Larry Merchant, Sandy Grady, and Stan Hochman were part of a revolution in sports writing. They'd go into clubhouses and coax players and coaches to tell the truth, and then write their columns with a novelist's flair. Today they are followed by Jeff McLean, Mike Sealski, and our own Jim Salisbury, who unearth the good, the bad, and the ugly by actually talking to players and getting their stories. That is, when COVID isn't shutting off their access. Lastly, I'll share with you my unrequited love of sports by remembering 3 scenes featuring the Philly team championships. In 1980, my wife and I had tickets to go see a play, The Elephant Man, at the DuPont Playhouse on the night the Phillies were to clinch the first World Series championship ever. I took a portable radio and headphone into the audience. When Tug McGraw threw the first strike past Willie Wilson, the final strike past Willie Wilson, I leaped up and let out a cheer that made up for 3 decades of frustration. I think it was in the middle of the unfortunate Elephant Man's death scene. In 2008, my brother-in-law and I sat at the very top of Citizen Bank Park and watched Jimmy Rollins lose a pop fly in a driving rain in the final game of that World Series. The game was finally called in the 6th inning, and we returned 2 days later to witness a Phillies win in the longest game in baseball championship history. And then in the best Super Bowl ever, I watched the ultimate underdog, backup Eagles quarterback Nick Foles, wander over to Coach Doug Peterson and suggest they run the Philly special with seconds left before the halftime. It had to be one of the cleverest plays ever devised, and it propelled the Eagles to their first championship since my dad and I listened on our old Admiral radio 58 years earlier. Sports, like the world, has inevitably changed. I must confess at times today they drive me nuts. I think back to yesteryear when Steve Van Buren slogged through the snowdrifts to get to one of the most important games of his life. To me, that captured the essence of sports. He was us. He wasn't removed from a society that the average fan was part of. He had to put on boots, a warm coat, and a pullover wool cap like I did in my rural backyard 70 years ago. I don't know. I don't like how big money has tainted sports. Sure, Bryce Harper plays baseball with a passion, but the $330 million he makes, is a giant chasm between him and the fans. No matter how he tries to stir them up by waving to arouse them in the right field stands. Owners who charge $8,000 for a seat license, and that's just for the privilege of sitting in a stadium built and subsidized by taxpayers, should be wearing masks and not to prevent COVID. Of course, those car and beer ads during football timeouts pay for the games on TV, but they ruin momentum and turn one hour of actual play into 3.5 hour ordeals. As for Thursday night football, just another way to milk more revenue and shorten players' careers. Betting on sports was always innocent fun when you were filling out brackets for the NCAA basketball tournament. But then suddenly all the pro leagues thought it was okay after opposing gambling for decades. They discovered how much money they could pull in by making it easier for the average fan to lose his house by taking the Buffalo Bills in 3 points. Prediction: a scandal of giant proportions is right around the corner. And then government will generously come to our rescue. I didn't like it when colleges were making fortunes off amateur athletes, but now I'm even more skeptical when players can make money from their name, image, and likeness. And how about transfer portals, where players can shop around to go to college, where they can haul in the most swag through endorsements? Or coaches like Brian Kelly, who jump ship for big paydays and leave daughters attending their old colleges so they can be badgered on social media. Sports shouldn't be corrupt like the Olympics have become, phony like kickboxing or American Ninja Warrior to occupy TV eyeballs, or subject to umpires and referees conferring with headsets on and causing endless delays to decide whether a pass was complete or a base runner safe. What first made me love sports was playing them, being the regular pitcher in the backyard wiffle ball games with my kids and all the kids in the neighborhood, skiing the death-defying nosedive at Stowe, Vermont, rocketing a serve on a local municipal tennis court. Sports took me, it takes all of us, away from regular routine and work and obligations that are less than heroic. We had to use our bodies and our brains for pursuits where we were either kings or dunces, and then it just became a glorious memory. All I can do now is walk with our dog and chuck frisbees for her to chase and catch. But it is still beautiful to watch an athlete in action. Sports will matter to me even when I'm on my deathbed and yelling at the Eagles coach to go for it on fourth down. He probably won't, and I will rip out my oxygen tube and go with one body quaking last gasp curse. And now we hope to get Jim Salisbury from Florida. He's going to join us about 10:25, he said. So that's all I have to say.
Greg, question for you.
Yeah.
What's your take on Leah Thomas, the swimmer at Penn?
Well, I think she should have her own NCAA championship for transsexuals or whatever she is, or he is. Uh, not men or women. So
Right.
that's my prejudice.
Greg, you asked us to think about what we don't like about sports, and I was thinking about that, and some of it is just that when we were kids, we were naive. And I don't know that a lot of things have changed. I mean, it came out that Mickey Mantle was a nasty drunk or things like that, and we didn't know that then. Today we see all these rogues and everything, but so it's more like what annoys you, and what annoys me is, the Eagles are down 20 points, and a guy makes a tackle, and he acts like he just won Powerball, or in golf, some leather young guy yells, "Get in the hole, get in the hole." That didn't used to happen. I don't think a golf ball has ever obeyed what I wanted it to do. And with the Phillies, I remember in the 60s being able to, for $1, we could go from Havertown on the Red Arrow and the PTC for $1, 50 cents to get in the bleachers at Connie Mack Stadium for 2 games. Today, it costs almost as much as a tank of gas to go to a game.
That's saying something.
I mean, so there's lots of annoyances more than sports has probably always had overpaid guys and, rogues and druggies and, drunks and whatever.
Yeah. I remember going to Connie Mack Stadium as a kid and just sitting there at the beginning of the games, and I would watch Willie Mays catch fly balls behind his back in practice, and I thought, geez, that's incredible. If he missed, he was going to get blasted on his head. I remember seeing Hank Aaron hit a home run into left center field, and it broke a seat out in left field. It was hit so hard.
Gee.
And I saw Sandy Koufax pitch a no-hitter in Philadelphia.
Just by comparison, Chuck Bednarik, for as great as he was, when I was a kid, he showed up at our front door in Paoli selling insurance. And he really wasn't, he was with the salesman. He was like the front guy for this team of 2 guys selling insurance. Now, today, he wouldn't even sweat any of that.
Yeah. There was Phillies had a third baseman named Willie Jones back in the early 50s. I remember a writer talking about him selling Christmas trees on Christmas Eve over in Marple Newtown. And those players made like $5,000 back then for an entire season. So
Kurt Simmons cut his toe off mowing his lawn.
yeah.
Do you think any major league star pitcher today mows his own lawn?
Right.
That's just a great moment. When I was a kid, I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, and we had a AAA minor league team that was in the Braves organization. And my dad came home one day and said, "I got tickets for the ball game Friday night. We really need this. It's the Jacksonville Suns, SUNS. We really need to go see him play because they've got this young player that everybody says, is going to do really well in the majors, and his name's Hank Aaron." So we saw Hank Aaron play one of his last minor league baseball games.
And minor league baseball has been decimated nowadays. I mean, they've taken away three quarters of the franchises in minor league cities.
Why? I don't follow baseball that much. Why is that?
Well, because of cost, because they don't want to play. They only want to develop
I had
the
kids at home who are now in their 30s. I used to love to go to Blue Rocks game.
Yeah.
It was cheap, and the players were could come talk to the kids, and they weren't so good that you watched 3 hours of pitching to see one run. And In fact, I actually saw an in the park grand slam. And the blue rifle.
Wow.
The guy hit it, the bases were loaded, he hit a legitimate triple. And then the fielder overthrew third base and he came home.
Well,
I think they'd rather let colleges provide the,
yeah, you're right.
the minor leagues, that no
Like what
cost.
they do in football.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing that bothers me and that's chased me away from hockey is that they've incorporated fighting into the game.
Yep.
I mean, it is not discouraged at all. I mean, so to
There's
me,
Jim.
fighting, which doesn't belong in any sport, has been incorporated into hockey, and it's just chased me away from it.
We ran in the
This
70s.
is our sports reporter.
Okay.
Stop the recording for Jim.
The hammer.